セガサターンSHIRO。
Hey everyone, and welcome to the SHIRO Editor's Corner, a completely new and unscripted series of mini-casts with your hosts Dave and Peter. Come join your elder SHIROs as we reminisce on our favorite Saturn memories in this new and nostalgia-packed podcast series. Hey everyone, this is Saturn Dave, and how you doing, Peter?
I'm doing really good. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. We just recently released the Knights cast, and so I'm really excited to see what people think of that. You know, it was a really fun episode to record with you. I had a blast talking about Knights, and it was fun hearing the things that you had to say about the game. Really interesting.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable to just completely kind of get down and nerd out and just kind of get right into the weeds of this game. So yeah, that was definitely a fun one to record. I agree.
No kidding. And I don't even think that we really got everything.
No.
I kept thinking to myself, like, there's probably a million more things that we could say about that game. But, you know, I think that we kind of captured the essence, at least. We got the important parts.
Yes, definitely.
Well, cool. You know, so we were kind of going back and forth on what we would talk about for this next episode, because this cast is supposed to be very conversational, and it's just interesting little topics that we kind of find amusing. And one of the topics that I thought would be great was something that you inspired in a Facebook post about bad games or games that I think are universally considered bad that we happen to have an affinity for. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty fair. These are games, like, it's funny, you know, the Saturn library I find to be really kind of low on stinkers. Like, there aren't too many games that, in my opinion, are super bad. But my opinion isn't, I think, it doesn't really jive with the general opinion. I think there are people out there that definitely see games that are bad that I enjoy. So I think this will be a really neat conversation.
You are much more forgiving than a lot of people, I think. I mean, if I'm being completely honest. And you know, the thing is, we have so many games now, like in this new age.
Yeah.
You've got retro games, you got new games being released. People have huge backlogs, and sometimes it's hard to see any real reason to persist with a game that's considered a stinker by many. You know what I'm saying? I know a couple of people I've heard say, I just don't see a point in trying to like a game. If my initial impression is that I don't like it, why would I waste time trying to like it when there's something else out there that I probably would love? You know, I think that's a really good point. And being somebody who doesn't have a lot of time these days, I can definitely see that. So just so everyone knows, these aren't games that we're promoting or trying to, like, you know, preach these games to you and get you to like them, but it's more or less just us sharing our feelings about these games and kind of telling you why it is that we like these games in spite of having so many shortcomings, you know?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I want to just kind of echo that. I don't think that we are, you know, endorsing these games by any means, but
No.
the games that, for, you know, whatever reason, there's just some aspect that really clicked with us. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what I hope that we can get across in this cast. And if, you know, the point isn't even to try to convince you to try these games or to like them or anything like that. You know, we understand that that these games aren't universally loved, and that's okay.
right.
But you know, they did find a few fans in the two of us, so that's what we're going to talk about.
Exactly. Right. And it's important to note that when a game is like really difficult, or a game has a lot of problems with the mechanics, or, you know, maybe it's the graphics that absolutely stink, you know, and you keep coming back to it, you keep persisting with it, you know, there must be something there that keeps drawing you back. So it was kind of hard for me to narrow mine down to just, I think we're going to pick 4 that we love for some reason, or that we keep persisting with. And then one that is an absolute unmitigated disaster. We've tried a million times to interact with the game or to, like, find some enjoyment out of it, and it's just irredeemable, basically.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, and there are those as well. So I'm going to have you kick it off. Why don't you tell us what your first pick is?
All right. So I want to start with a game called Independence Day, ID4. So this was a movie tie-in. It was actually released not too long after the VHS release of the Independence Day movie. And that was, you know, that was kind of like a summer action movie that was starring Will Smith, and it was meant to be sort of like a low budget kind of fun movie to go and see, and ended up doing significantly better than most folks expected. Like it ended up being quite a cult
I love
classic.
that
And
movie.
it is. I do too, and I'm not usually a fan of those sorts of movies, but there's just something about it. Whether it's the mix of humor with sort of crazy over the top plot and the character, like it just works, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense. So, anyways, so the game inevitably came out, and if you're thinking that Acclaim published it, you're actually wrong. It wasn't Acclaim, because they were famous for doing sort of cheesy movie tie-in games.
Right.
It was published by Fox Interactive.
That's
So,
right.
um, the game came out on Saturn and PlayStation, and it was universally panned. Critics didn't like it, but I rented it at the time. Because I was having a friend over and we wanted to play some two-player games
Hmm.
that we sort of hadn't, that I didn't own, and so this was a new release, and so we rented it and we took it home, and for most of our playing, we were playing the two-player game. There's a split-screen two-player game,
Right.
and it's just like aerial dogfights. You pick your plane and you kind of fly around all the different maps, and you try to find your opponent and shoot them down, and you're flying around collecting different power-ups, so to either find new planes that you can use, or new armaments for your plane. So it's kind of mindless, it's kind of fun. So in two-player, I thought it actually really worked. I'm split screen is never the best way to enjoy a two-player experience, but it was fine. I didn't really have any problems with it. So, ultimately in the fullness of time, I ended up getting it, and spent some quality time, with the game as a one-player experience. And, again, I wasn't expecting much because I'd read so much negativity about it,
Hmm.
but it was not bad. Like, there's not much to it. You pick a plane and you go out and you fly, and there's missions for each level, and the missions are usually fairly similar. Destroy the shield generators, go in and blow up the alien ship. There's usually not much more to it than that.
Right.
So it is kind of repetitive, and there are definitely instances where you can spend a ton of time flying around without seeing an enemy. So once you blast a few enemies, out of the sky, they don't respawn, they don't regenerate. So it could be that you're flying around this giant map looking for one last alien ship,
Hmm.
and never really running into them, even though you're kind of watching your radar and everything, because these maps are pretty large. So, I could see how some folks see it as boring, but I just find it relaxing.
Right.
The plane controls relatively well. It's pretty straightforward. You jump into a plane, you take off. If you see icons, it's either fuel, or it's a shield, or it's extra missiles or whatever, and you go and complete your objective. The game's plot follows the movie relatively okay. It kind of goes through a sequence of levels that more or less resembles what you would have seen in the game.
Hmm.
So, if you've seen the movie, it makes sense. It ties in okay, and there's nothing to me overly wrong with it. And so I've just kind of enjoyed it. It's one of those games where if you've got half an hour and you just want to play something simple, where you're not going to think too much, where you don't have to invest yourself too deeply into it, it actually works. It doesn't control half bad, and you just go in and sit down and shoot some aliens and destroy some shield generators, and it's a good time.
Kind of reminds me of Robotica, that kind of thing where it's just like
Yes.
meandering.
Yes.
It's very
Yes.
repetitive. It's kind of beige. The game is pretty beige.
Yep.
It
Yep.
sounds like it had things going for it, but it was kind of an oversight in development, like in designing the level so that it kept you engaged. Because it sounds like you would be engaged at the beginning, but then once you wipe out all your enemies, you're just kind of looking around for that last enemy so you could finish the level, and you might spend like 10 minutes doing that. That's where they
Mhm.
needed to probably go back and figure out how to like keep the engagement high, and the game probably would have done better. But I mean, of course, it's based on a killer movie. And so I think we all like
Mhm.
wanted to like it, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that was a factor too. Like if this was some generic, flying shooting game, then maybe the appeal would be less. But they did an okay job, with the graphics
Hmm.
representing the alien ship that's above you. The play fields are relatively sparse, but they're okay. There's nothing in there that I would say is horribly bad. And you're right. it would be too easy for me to sort of start a list of things that could have been done that would have made the game a little bit better,
Hmm.
and starting with, maybe some more variety in the missions or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
um but it is what it is, and it's not a game that I think belongs in the dustbin of history. Like, it's okay,
Right.
especially if you watch the movie and then you want to sit down to play the game. It's not that bad. I don't want anybody expecting this to be the greatest game ever, because it's not.
Right.
It really isn't. But it isn't too bad.
Yeah.
There's one neat tidbit about it that I noticed in the manual years ago, and that it talks about this game being compatible with the link cable. And so,
Right.
actually, a few years ago, I ended up having a friend over, and he brought his copy of Independence Day, and I had my copy of Independence Day, and we had a link cable, we had two Saturns, we had two TVs, and we were trying to get this option to work, because playing two players when using a link cable with both players having their own screen would have actually been super cool. And we couldn't get it to work. We couldn't figure out why. We were reading the manuals and whatever. Finally, I gave up. I couldn't figure it out. I went online to sort of see what it is that we were doing wrong.
Mm.
And it turns out the feature was cut really late in development.
Wow.
And so, it is referenced in the game manual. There are screenshots in the game manual of the options you need to pick to get the link cable game going, and yet it doesn't work. So I'm sure not too many people noticed, because at the time, the link cable was never actually even officially released here.
Hmm.
So, it would have been really something crazy for people to try out. But yeah, in the end, it doesn't work. So, maybe that sums the game up pretty well. It's almost like it's good enough, but not quite for most people, and yet I seem to like it.
Yeah, I think Fox Interactive announced that the game would be released in late 97 or early 98. But then it was bumped up to November 96 in order to coincide with the film's release on VHS.
Hmm.
So it was rushed, essentially. And it sounds like that
Yeah.
it was actually Radical Entertainment that developed it, who are the same folks that did Power Play on the Saturn as well, which is
Yes.
a really good series. They did some other stuff too. So they developed it for Fox Interactive, and it just got pushed up to the point where they had to cut features. So it could have been a better game, had they had more time. But what they did put out is worth folks checking out. If you're interested in a kind of like I wouldn't really call it a sim. It's just more of a, it's a third person too. There's also Wing Arms. If you're interested in another flight combat game, Wing Arms is great on the Saturn. But if you got time and you want to check this out, would you recommend folks give it a try?
You know what? I would. If you're a gamer that goes in with an open mind, understands that games of that era had limitations and all the rest of it, you're not going to be overly disappointed. But if you're going in expecting huge pyrotechnics and all these crazy dogfights in the
Mm-hmm.
air and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be that. And so go in with an open mind, and you might eke out some enjoyment out of it. It isn't the system's best game, of course, but
Right.
it's, in my opinion, it's not a stinker. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, folks should give it a try. I recommend.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely one that I have a copy, and I've probably played it once or twice. I do remember it being very beige. But again,
Mhm.
it does, like you said, it kind of gets that film vibe, so, and I do love the
Yes.
film. So I think it's one of those things where I might watch the film and then I play the game a little bit, just to kind of put myself in the mindset of what folks were consuming back then
Yeah.
in terms of video games and stuff. But yeah, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like right in the middle, it's like a C.
Definitely. Okay, I want to move on to your first game, Dave. I'm really curious to hear what you picked.
Well, we're not going in any particular order, but I guess I'll pick the one that I probably have a reputation by now of liking this game, or it's, even though it's kind of considered a dark horse. I really love Sega Touring Car Championship. And
Mm,
is this game bad? I think some people might be surprised that I'm putting it in there. Now, mind you, we're not saying that these games are objectively bad. What we're saying is that these games are considered bad by a lot of people, and there is a good reason for this. Um, with Sega Touring Car Championship, I think that it comes down to a couple of things. First of all, there are some phenomenal racing games on the Saturn. Games that
yeah.
almost play themselves. They're so good. You pop in Sega Rally and it's bliss, like it's just such a
Hmm.
well-made game. Such an amazing Saturn port. It's a lot of fun, no doubt. Sega Touring Car, on the other hand, is got a lot of stuff wrong with it, if I'm being honest. And yet somehow I've come to love this game so much over time. And I think that the biggest issues that are holding Sega Touring Car back, for people who don't know, Sega Touring Car was a arcade game on the Model 2. Yeah, it was on the
Model
Model 2. It
2.
was
Yep.
AM3, right? And it was essentially like the German DTM touring car circuit. You know, with you had Mercedes Benz, and you had all these touring cars. You had Alphas, and you had there's like a Toyota in there, Toyota Celica, but there never was a Toyota Celica in the DTM's 1995
Yeah.
German touring car championship. But essentially, it's just a touring car series where like stock vehicles are souped up and made to go really, really fast, right? And so essentially, that's what the game kind of captures. It's a very fast racing game, but the frame rate is very low. You know, so if you combine a very fast racing game with a very low frame rate, you're talking about
Mhm.
like a slideshow, basically. And for a racing game, that's practically a sin. You know, like that's like the worst sin a racing game can commit is having a really low frame rate,
Mhm.
especially when it's moving so fast. You come up on certain corners, and you know the guardrail comes up on you so quick, you know, you have a hard time really reacting in time. On top of that, the default controls for this game are
Mhm.
horrendous, I would say. Like the cars don't really control very well right off the bat, you know. And the Saturn game has two sides essentially. It has the arcade side where you can't really do any kind of tuning to your car. You can't really change the difficulty. It's just the arcade game essentially, or it's an attempt at porting the arcade game and kind of distilling that
Mhm.
experience on the Saturn. Um, and where that's concerned, I think people have a lot of difficulty controlling the vehicle, and that leads to frustration. And before you know it, they're just like, "Why even bother when there are better racing games on the Saturn?" I think is what it is. Um, for me,
Yep.
it's a game that I love the music. I think the graphics are actually quite good for the Saturn. It's objective. Some people might disagree, but
Mhm.
I think that they're pretty good for the Saturn. And, you know, there are just so many little things about the game that I love that come together to make it, for me, a special game. I mean, there's Netlink support that it wasn't even talked about on the back of the box, but you had Netlink support in there where you could upload your best score to leaderboards, which you can still do now today because of Zaiden
Mhm.
bringing that functionality back to the Netlink zone. And of course, Sega RPG Fan getting the tunneling thing working so folks can use their Dream Pies to connect their Saturns and upload that data to the internet. So that was cool. That was forward thinking. There were like global events where the game utilized your clock, which I think
Mhm.
were really cool and forward thinking. It also utilizes the 3D control pad to a good degree. I mean, I find that the game is much more controllable with the 3D control pad. And I think what I like about it is that on the Saturn side, it allows you to tune your vehicle. And when you do tune your vehicle, you can actually create vehicles that are infinitely more controllable, like just much, much better. And then, you know,
Mhm.
on the arcade side, I would say that your best bet is just picking manual transmission and just downshifting really heavily in the turns, you know. That seems to work pretty well. But again, the game is not easy to come to grips with either way. And so I can't really blame people for judging it harshly. You know, I can't blame them. I know that it's got like pretty bad shortcomings in terms of a racer, but it's just one of those games that I continue to persist with and I continue to play it, recognizing that it's not nearly as good as Daytona or Sega Rally, but that I like it.
But isn't it funny though, like, so Daytona USA, the first one, it had a pretty poor frame rate and, pop-in issues and all the rest of it, and yet people universally quite like that game.
It's much more easy to
And
control, though. You know, wouldn't you say
yeah.
Daytona?
Oh yeah.
You're absolutely right. Terrible pop in. Really, really bad frame rate on the original Daytona, and yet somehow it remains controllable. Like you can control it, and
Yeah.
you know those power slides feel really, really good. You know, with Sega Touring Car, it's very twitchy. You know, it's that thing where the back
Mhm.
end of the car kind of like slides out, but then it kind of is going all over the place. It's just very twitchy, right? And it's because those default controls are just, I don't know what they were thinking when they were like, this is it. This is what we're gonna make the default controls, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've shared my own tuning settings with folks before where they apply my tuning settings and they're just like, oh my God, this is like infinitely more controllable, you know?
Yes.
Um, So I really don't know. I really don't know what they were thinking, but this was AM Annex actually. So it wasn't, maybe they remained in the annex after they developed this game.
But again, like this is a game that even compared to the earlier Sega racers, it actually has an incredible amount of content.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of tracks,
Yes.
there's a lot of music. The
Right.
side track scenery is really impressive, and
It
you're
is.
right. The cars go at a pretty good speed, and then if you're playing in the cockpit view, you get a rear view mirror,
Hmm.
right? Like so, there's all these things that didn't really appear in other Sega racers. So I mean, there's certainly not a shortage of content in the game.
Definitely not. It's just got like all these tiny little things that I think just make me wish that they had done other things right. Like again,
Mm,
it's kind of a shame, really, because the game could be so much better. And
yeah.
again, with your own settings, tweaking the game. Fortunately, they did allow us to, tune our vehicles and save those settings, and so you can kind of tame the controls a bit, but you can't tame that frame rate. I mean, again, like the game does a pretty good job of simulating that sense of speed, especially in the Grunwald course where it feels like you're just going downhill and it's incredibly fast. And yet the frame rate is so low that anytime you come up on a corner, it's really difficult to judge it. You know that you always have to be kind of putting on your brakes and turning at the right moment. It's really all about course memorization at that point, but it's just very difficult for somebody just coming into it to be able
Yeah.
to come away with it with a good experience. You have to persist, you have to continue to put up with the game. And again, there's that whole argument is like, why would I do that if there are better racers on the Saturn, where I don't have to do that?
But you clearly love this game. So what would you recommend? How should folks approach this game if they want to squeeze out some enjoyment out of it?
Yeah, I do love the game. I do recommend that folks give it a shot. It's very forward thinking. Again, I recommend that if you're doing the arcade side, you definitely have to choose manual transmission. I recommend you use the 3D control pad. It definitely gives you more nuance in your control. And go ahead and downshift hard into the turns, and that'll kind of allow you to do kind of a drifting maneuver and get through those turns without going off into the dirt or into the grass or whatever, hitting the sidewalls. It's going to be much more difficult when the course narrows, and I think at that point it's just
Mm,
going to be repetition and practice, knowing the course inside and out. I'm not sure that many people will stick with it for very long, if they're frustrated. But as tends to be the case, like when you do well at a game, you get more enjoyment out of it. So I definitely suggest folks check out the Saturn side of it and try tuning their vehicle, softening up the suspension, maybe messing around with the tuning settings and finding something that works well for them. The music is phenomenal. The Avex tracks, actually, there's a couple of different options for the music, which is phenomenal. And you even bought me a silver of the game. I had to throw that in there as a little. No, it was K, A Murder of Crows, that got me the silver for this game, and so I owned the original game and a silver of it. And so yeah, I definitely recommend folks check it out. It's one of those games that a lot of people are hard on, and for good reason. So
yeah.
can't blame them there.
Fair. Oh, I'm trying to decide which one to talk about next, but I think I'm going to go with Mansion of Hidden Souls, or I should say, The Mansion of Hidden Souls, not to be confused with a Sega CD game of almost the same
Right.
title, right? So The Mansion of Hidden Souls actually released in 95, so it was a very early Saturn game. And it sort of released at that time where the PlayStation had come out and everyone was really wowed with it, and there wasn't too much Saturn games coming out just yet. And the big three Saturn Christmas games hadn't come yet. And so every game that came out, people were really kind of looking to see, well, what is the Saturn capable of? Like, what have they done this time? And it was an FMV game, which was really losing favor at that time with players,
Right.
because it was, compared to a game where you've got full control and, of motion and movements and whatever, it's much more of a cinematic type of
Mhm.
game,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so, yeah, initially, I have to admit, I dismissed it. I thought, this sucks. This is nothing. Like, the graphics are crap. It's essentially a video, and it's
Mhm.
grainy. And admittedly, it wasn't nearly as grainy as the Sega CD game. nor was the frame rate as bad as a Sega CD game. Like it looked, smoother and better and all that, but still, like it was like watching a creepy, computer generated early 90s type of effort that just didn't seem to fit the mold of what a video game should
Hmm.
be. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like you weren't running around shooting people or racing people or whatever, collecting rings for that matter, or eating mushrooms or anything. Like it was it was an adventure. It was almost like a visual choose your own adventure novel. That's kind of how I saw
Right.
it. And when that clicked in my head, then it was like, oh, okay, I could try this again and see where I get with it. And so the story is sort of like a mystery sci-fi type of story, where you're trapped in this mansion and there's this mysterious blood red moon, and then there's these like ghost heads that talk to you from time to time, and there are people to sort of visit and explore in this mansion, and you try to sort of unravel this mystery. And there's the odd inventory item you can grab or whatever as you kind of play through it. But the thing is, like, once you really get into it, it kind of draws you in, and then you're almost committed to wanting to see this game through to the end, want to see the story through to its resolution. As I discovered, as I kind of went along playing it, you can get bad
Hmm.
endings.
Yep.
You could have your adventure sort of end, where you have to start everything over again. But just like with a choose your own adventure book, once you've been through it once, then you kind of know, okay, I made a decision here, I made a decision there, and you can do things a little bit differently. So things like the order in which, you talk to certain characters matters, or, which rooms you end up going to see within the mansion. And then there's all this like mysterious stuff about butterflies and whatever. So, you're kind of left wondering what the ending is going to be like. And so once it hooks you sufficiently, then you're in for a good time, in my opinion. But the trouble is, this game, I think, is so different from what most people at the time thought a game should be, that they never stuck around long enough to let themselves be hooked into it, if that makes any sense,
Sure.
um, because to this day, it's a relatively cheap Saturn game to
Hmm.
get. The cover of the game, of the North
Bizarre.
American version, is sort of really
Yeah.
weird looking. Like it just looks like somebody did it as an art project in grade 6 or something. Like it looks super, corny and
Yeah.
cheesy, but it's good in the same way that, for example, Corpse Killer is good. It's cheesy, it's kind of goofy, but it, like, once you get kind of drawn into it, it's actually pretty fun. It's not bad. So, you've got to go in my opinion, with a mindset of, I'm going to play something different. I'm going to play like a visual choose your own adventure. And once you get into that mindset, I think you're going to do just fine.
Hmm.
So, it's a game that I know most people don't like. It was not rated nearly as high as the Sega CD game, which to my surprise was rated much, much better.
Yeah.
But this one, the reviews came in, they were like, oh, it's less, it's more disjointed. This isn't fun. It's FMV, and that's on its way out and
Right.
whatever. And, I'm not going to argue with any of those criticisms because they're not entirely wrong or inaccurate. I just think that a lot of folks missed the point with this game when it was
Mhm.
current. And I mean, I don't know, is this a game that you played when it was current?
Absolutely. And I can tell you that much of what you thought of it was the same as I thought back then. So this is what I would call kind of like a walking simulator. You walk around and a story unfolds in front of you, and you kind of trigger events, but you're basically along for the ride. And
Hmm.
essentially, this game is much more about atmosphere and mood than it is necessarily about gameplay. It's not Alien Soldier,
Yeah.
for goodness sake. It's not
Yes.
it because that's the point there, or with Knights, Score Attack or exploring the A life and stuff like that. But like with this game, it really is just like, here's an experience, come along for the ride, right? So
Hmm.
back then, the graphics didn't really appeal to me. We were already kind of over that. Like you said, the walking FMV kind of scene to scene
Hmm.
was already kind of dated. It's funny that now, in hindsight, graphics mean much less to me because I'm a little more graphics agnostic now. We live in
Hmm.
an era where games exist with all different kinds of graphics. And so it's all relative what good graphics are, I mean, because a game on the PS5 is going to smoke a game on the PS2, but that doesn't mean those games aren't great, or that despite the graphics being
Hmm.
older, whatever. So yeah, it's funny. The game draws me in much more nowadays, and I enjoy it. Actually, I do. This is a game I'm glad that you picked because I would have picked it too. It's a game that I like,
Mhm.
despite the fact that it's a little lacking. It's short. The
Yep.
story on the original Sega CD is arguably better, and yet the graphics on that one are pretty terrible, and the frame rate almost makes me sick. Like it almost makes me want to vomit because it's so bad. Whereas here, the graphics are much better. System Saycom did an amazing job with the music. I love the music. I love the
Yes.
atmosphere. I've told people this before, but I'm a huge like Twin Peaks kind of David Lynch kind. I like weird stuff. I like stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable or unsettling. And so that's the things that I
Mhm.
like about this game. But yeah, so
Definitely. And I honestly think that if folks go into this thinking it's less of a game and more of an atmospheric sort of
mhm,
experience, then they'll be more apt to sort of understand the programmer's vision for this
right.
game. Because again, this came out at a time where people were looking for like cutting edge 32-bit, give me the best polygon graphics. I want to, with every press of every button, I want to be running around and doing things. Well, this game is exactly not
Right.
that. To move forward from one scene to the next, you don't even hold the forward button down. You just press it
Mhm,
once, and then a short clip plays as you progress from one area to the
yeah.
next. So it's not a gamer's game. Like Knights, we were talking last cast, is a gamer's game. This is not a gamer's game. It's more of a it's using the video game
Mhm,
medium to tell a story,
exactly.
and you have some control over how that story
Mhm,
unfolds, but at the end of the day it is a linear story that has to unfold from A to B to C,
yeah.
right? So so again, if you're going in with the expectation that, hey, maybe this isn't going to be a video game like I'm traditionally
Mhm.
used to, then it might make better sense to
Yeah,
folks, so that would be my recommendation.
there are like walking simulators like Dear Esther, which was pure walking simulator. You're listening to dialogue as you're walking around. This is more like Gone Home, if folks are familiar with that one on the PC. You do interact with a few items and you do kind of have to drive the story a bit. But again, it's on rails at the end of the day. Like until you find the object that you need in order to get to the next thing, it's just basically, like you said, here's an experience, come along for the ride. It's not that long, almost
Mhm.
like an interactive movie, if you will. Very
Mhm.
weird. It gets very weird at the end. I'm not going to
Yes,
spoil
it
anything
does.
other than to say it's weird and maybe even nightmare fuel. But again, if you think you have played almost everything on the Saturn and you want to experience something different, this is definitely that. It's definitely different. So I would recommend this to folks. And it's definitely serves as a test bed for what would come in Lunacy, which is a much
Mm,
more refined, much better game. One of my
yes.
favorites on the console.
Yes, agreed. All right, Dave, let's go to your next game.
Okay, I think I know what I'm going to pick next, and that game is Croc. I mentioned
Uh,
this a couple of days ago, and somebody immediately was like, "Wait, Croc is a bad game?" So no, Croc is not a bad game. And again, I want to repeat: these are not necessarily bad games. These are games that have really significant, glaring shortcomings that we have persisted with. And
mm,
they are considered to be bad games by some folks. They're divisive. They're not universally loved by any means. Croc is one of those games where it's got so much going for it. Argonaut Software developed this game that would be possibly a game for the Nintendo 64
mhm,
platform, possibly a Yoshi game. And
mhm,
then, of course, there's this drama that unfolded with, Nintendo saying, okay, well, that's actually a really great idea. We're going to take that and do our own thing. And then Argonaut was left holding the bag, like, well, okay, we got to turn this into our own character, basically. So
mhm,
they did, they had enough invested into the idea that they just went ahead and ran with it and made their own game. And they're talented developers. They did games like Star Fox, they did other really cool games that were quite successful. Croc is a game that has charm, it has character, great character design, really vivid colors. It's got excellent music. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say the soundtrack is phenomenal. Um, it is a 3D platformer essentially, and we don't have a lot of those on the Saturn. So that's one of the first reasons I think a lot of people have probably at least dipped their toe into this game. And one of the first things they probably find is that it's frustratingly difficult to control. Okay.
yes.
And
Yes.
when I said that poor frame rate is a sin for a racing game, I think I have to say that bad control is a sin for a platforming game, you know?
Yeah.
However, this is no Bubsy 3D, okay? This is no, I mean, there are much worse controlling 3D platforming games. Um, I give this game somewhat of a pass because it was developed in a time where, almost simultaneously with like Mario 64, where there were no rules yet. Nobody really knew how to make a 3D platforming game.
Mm.
And everybody was kind of trying different stuff, you know, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. You had games on the PS1 like Jumping Flash. They did a really cool, it was first person. It was kind of like you jump up and you'd kind of see the platforms that you were going to land on, and that would help inform your choice, you know, in terms of like where you would land. But of course, not every game can be Jumping Flash. So, you know, every developer simultaneously was in a land rush to figure out the best formula for making a 3D platforming game. And with Croc, it's kind of tank controls, wouldn't you say? It's kind of like tank controls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to a degree, the difficulty or the frustration controlling the game can be mitigated by using the 3D control pad. But personally, I find that it's inconsistent where some portions are easier to control with the 3D control pad, and then some portions are easier to negotiate with the digital, you know, so it's like you're constantly
Mhm.
switching back for different areas, you know, to be able to negotiate these platforms. So failure is inevitable unless you persist with this game. You're going to die a lot. It's going to be frustrating. You might feel like throwing your controller. And I think that that might be enough to dissuade people from sticking with the game when there are so many other great 3D platforming games out there.
So yeah, so some years ago, years and years ago, I decided to play through Croc and give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
And so same sort of feedback as what you just mentioned. I thought the controls were really tough, and
Mm-hmm.
they were made even tougher because the camera would not always cooperate
Yes.
the intuitive way that you would want it to. And I agree with you. Like, these were early days in 3D game design. So there were no rules. They were
Mm-hmm.
just kind of making it up as they went along.
Mm-hmm.
And so I persisted with the game, and I completed several of the islands because each sort of world is like an island or whatever. And you kind of go through it. But it got to the point where I got just too frustrated.
Right.
It was just, to me, it was just too difficult to keep going. So I gave up on it. So I completely understand
Mm-hmm.
where you're coming from. But I will say, I mean, the visuals, they did a pretty good job considering it was Saturn hardware, it was 3D and all the rest of it.
Right.
And the soundtrack is really nice.
Yes.
It's a good soundtrack,
Yeah.
you know?
It has the kind of visual polish and presentation that you would expect of like a first party game. You know, they did really polish up
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
visuals, the presentation, the character design. It's got all of that going for it in spades. You know, it's just that camera is awkward and the controls, yes, are very stiff. Sometimes it's that situation where you're just having to tap the controller, you know, Tomb Raider 1 style to kind of
Hmm.
make sure you're in the right
Yeah.
position to be
Yeah.
able to make a jump, but then the platform moves and you end up in the lava and you're just, it's so frustrating, you know? It's not that kind of like where with Mario 64, somehow they were able to figure out how to make the collision somewhat forgiving to where you could like be hopping around and, you know, negotiate these moving platforms with a greater degree of success, I guess, and not really needing to be controlling the game so carefully, you know, like, you know, because that's the thing is
Hmm.
it becomes a kind of a chore. And I admit that, you know, when a game becomes a chore, that's kind of when you turn it off, right? You know, so
Yeah.
it's not a platform exclusive. It was simultaneously developed for the PlayStation as well. And I think folks tend to feel that
Mhm.
not only the graphics are a little better, but also the camera is pulled out just a bit more. So you have more information on top, bottom, left, and right. Um, yeah, the camera is just positioned a little bit differently. And I think that that overall just makes the PlayStation version, if you're going to try to play the game, the one to try. I think it got a PC version as well, but believe it or not, without looking it up, I'm don't know if I'm right about that. But anyway, yeah, it got a sequel on the PlayStation as well. So, but if you don't have the PlayStation
Hmm.
version and you want to try it on the Saturn, I definitely recommend folks try it. But I do think, without a doubt, you're going to experience what I do, the frustration with the controls. And you really are going to have to put yourself in the frame of mind that this was just the Wild West, like no rules, everybody figuring
Yeah.
it out for themselves. They did a decent job. It's just that Nintendo would refine it and do it better almost at the same time, putting out Mario 64. And again, when it's held in that light, when it's judged next to Mario 64, then it falls so short, because they were able to get it right
Right.
the first time out the gate with a lot more refinement. So, yeah.
Yes.
There's also a funny little thing I want to say real quick about the graphical glitches in Croc, because the Saturn version does have like these weird graphical glitches. And I think that it might be certain pressings of the game. I'm not sure if it's every pressing of the game, but I know that like the menu, sometimes Croc will be invisible or he won't have a head or something, And it's funny how like having a controller inserted or starting up the game without the controllers inserted, I've heard it fixes that problem. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and if okay, I could be wrong here too, but I think the issue was confined to the European
Oh,
version of
really?
Croc, where if you just power up your system with the game in it and it just kind of boots immediately, then yeah, most of Croc's body will be missing. But if you first turn the Saturn on and then insert the game and then boot it from the
Right.
BIOS, then you'll be fine. So that I'm pretty sure is exclusive to the European version.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about the North American stuff. But
I've
yes.
experienced some like invisible Croc, yeah, with the North American version.
Oh,
And
really?
I do think you're right. I think that was the thing. There are a couple other games on the Saturn where there are problems like that. I think In the Hunt is one of those ones where you have to start it up without any controllers inserted. Um, with Croc, I think it's like you said, boot to the BIOS, stick the CD in or mount the CD, and then close the door, and that seems to fix the problem. But it's just something I thought was worth mentioning. But yeah.
Interesting. It's probably a symptom of the Saturn having so many hardware revisions, right? That
Oh yeah.
you got to kind of test it on everything and hope that it'll work. So
Yeah, and where the PlayStation, they really like kept people in their corral, I guess you could say, of like doing things this way. They really didn't like it when folks like Naughty Dog would kind of like
yeah,
break the system and go outside to try to eke more performance out of the PlayStation, because they wanted it to be standardized across, revisions of the PlayStation, So yeah, folks should go try Croc. Go for me. Do it for me. Try it out. Let me know what you think. You can let us know in the comments. If you find the game frustrating or if you find it charming. But yeah, I definitely think there are things to like about the game for sure.
agreed.
And what's your next one?
Oh my. Okay, I'm gonna go with Crypt Killer, which is also known as Henry Explorers in Japan, which is
That's right.
kind of an odd. Anyways, so Crypt Killer is it was originally an arcade game made by Konami, and it's a shooting game. So I think it was meant to be based on sort of the Indiana Jones sort of hunting for treasure type of uh, setting, right?
Right.
In the arcade, the cabinet had, like actual shotguns that you would use, and you
Right.
could, pump them to reload and all the rest of it. So that was unique and fun. And the arcade, it was also a 3-player game.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was the draw. It wasn't the prettiest game upon release, but it was decent in the arcades. So Konami brought this over to the Saturn and the PlayStation for that matter. So it wasn't just exclusive to our machine,
Mm-hmm.
but it did not come over well at all. And so the two main changes is you cannot play 3 players on the Saturn version. It
Mm-hmm.
is up to 2 players only. And the visuals are utterly horrendous. Like, I don't know that I've ever seen a game as badly pixelated in 3D as Crypt Killer. Like, it is terrible. You're going to wonder how this ever passed quality control. And I mean all of it. The sort of the cutscenes are bad. The in-game action is horrendous. Most of the enemy, so the environments are 3D, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just bad 3D. Where trees look like they're made out of 2.5 polygons, I guess, things like that.
Right.
Um, and the enemies are for the most part sprites, and they scale because you're moving along a 3D rail.
Right.
And when they scale in, I mean, there are some enemies which, if you blow them apart, you will literally blow them into like 3 or 4 pixels because that's all they are, right? So it does look like a dog's breakfast. It's terrible, and I think what that does when you have visuals that are that bad, it is seriously immersion breaking.
Yeah.
So you could have a solid game about whatever, but if your visuals look that horrendously bad, like this is beyond funny bad. This is bad, 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 right?
Yeah.
Where you're wondering, okay, like where do they find the like how did this pass quality control?
We're talking
And
about the
so
graphics
yeah,
though, right? We're not talking about the gameplay.
absolutely.
We're talking about
Nope,
like
just
they're like
graphics.
vomit on the screen, right? Your Saturn
Yes.
is literally like throwing up graphics onto the screen, right?
Yes, and I mean, so the other crime with the graphics is, so it's an on rails 3D game. When a game is on rails,
Right.
you should be able to construct it in such a way that you're masking all of your clipping and your
Mhm.
pop in, and your textures should be optimized because you're never changing away from that rail,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So you should be able to pull off fantastic visuals.
Hmm.
Panzer Zwei is a good example of that. It's an on-rails shooter, and so they were able to do some amazing things visually. And Panzer Zwei is probably the exact opposite visually of Crypt Killer. So, it's bad. The pop-in is really, really bad, and that is unforgivable with a game that's on rails.
Right.
Now, the game itself is actually pretty cool. Like, it is an on rails first person shooter, kind of like a Virtua Cop idea. But at 2 points throughout each level, you come to a sort of like a decision point and you can choose which way to go.
Right.
And so each level can have multiple sort of permutations of it.
Mhm.
And then when you get at the end and you fight the boss, you end up picking up the Eye of Guidance or whatever the item is. I can't even remember anymore. And so you kind of hang on to these items. And at the end of the level of the game, which is 3 levels of your choosing, you end up coming to sort of like a final area where you display all the items that you have collected, and then you get one of multiple endings, which in and of themselves are really bonkers. Like one of the endings is, oh, this whole game was just like a B movie shoot, and you're just an actor. Like it's just
Right.
totally ridiculous, right? So
Yes.
and yet it's kind of fun. It's fun to sort of play around Halloween time because the monsters are, you've got zombies and skeletons and like these like killer fish that again look like 3 pixels, 3 shades of blue or whatever, and so in a way it's saved by its gameplay because its gameplay is okay.
Mhm.
So even though it looks like just garbage, it's okay. Like it even looks worse than, I would say, for example, Revolution X. So it's that bad,
How about Death
and yet
Crimson?
I would even give Death Crimson the edge. It is
Wow. Wow.
probably the worst looking Saturn game that I've ever had the
So are you saying,
displeasure of.
would you say that you kind of almost like it ironically, or you just like sincerely enjoy the game?
So, okay, I guess if I were to sort of explain why I like a game that I've just spent 5 minutes trashing, it is that ironically, the game design is actually pretty fun. And the
Okay.
concept behind it, the execution and the control is pretty good, you know?
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
the visuals are so bad that you will cringe, but as you kind of go through it, you're
Mhm.
going to be like, okay, I see the game here. I see what they were going
Mhm.
for. The arcade visuals aren't nearly as bad. They're actually not that good, but they're not this bad. So you could say that it's a bad
Right.
port of an average looking game to begin with. But yeah, the game
Mm.
design is fairly solid. The gameplay works, and it's sure got a lot of longevity. Like, unlike Virtua Cop 1, for instance, where you just kind of go through the levels, here not only do you get to
Mm.
pick what level and what order you want to tackle them in, because you do 3 levels out of a selection of, I think it's 6. But within the 3 levels you pick, there are 2 points where you pick multiple paths. So really, there's a lot of game in there for a light gun shooter. And yet it just looks so bad. And I think it's to the point where it looks so bad that a lot of folks, a lot of critics, magazine reviewers, etc., they just were not able to get over that massive, massive pixelated hump of of a stumbling block, which were the
Right.
graphics. So, the saying how a game, the graphics aren't everything in a game, and that's true, but you can get it to the point where they're so, so bad that it really takes
Right.
away from the rest of it. So, it's a game that you're going to have a couple laughs with if you're playing it with a friend for sure. But if you want to sit down
Mhm.
and just, go through it, and maybe put on some of those funny glasses or whatever that blur your vision a little bit, it'll probably be an improvement, so
Did this one come with any kind of 3D glasses?
no, it did not.
It did not.
And
Okay.
in the arcade, it wasn't a 3D type of game either. Like
Okay. All right.
3D is in stereoscopic 3D.
I know Konami did that with their other game,
Contra,
the
yes.
Contra one. Yeah, okay. So, but they
Yeah.
didn't do that with this one. It's
Mm-mm.
funny. I say graphics don't really matter that much now in hindsight, but back then graphics were everything. I mean,
Yes.
because leaps and bounds were being made, and media outlets were so hard on a game if its graphics were not up to par.
Mhm.
Because again, we were being blown away by every new thing that came out, and it was just like, well, why isn't it as good as this? I mean, not everything can be Virtua Cop, right, or Virtua Cop 2. We don't
Mhm.
expect that. But I mean, Area 51 came to the Saturn and it was almost like arcade perfect port. So, I
Yep.
mean, it can be done third party. It can be done and it can be done well. So we kind of had standards. So yeah,
Yes.
I think Lee Nutter said in OSSM, official Saturn magazine, he said, more fun could be derived from the Virtua gun if you were to spend an entire evening pistol whipping yourself with it.
Oh, Mr. Nutter.
Yeah, exactly. So that was his review of this game, but don't pistol whip yourselves.
No,
But
no, you got and see, I guess my advice is for folks that have persisted through the Saturn version of House of the Dead, this is a
yes.
couple steps below that in terms of graphical fidelity, but if you can do House of the Dead, you can do
Lower your
Crypt
standards
Killer.
a little bit more.
Yeah, lower your
Okay.
standards, people, and then you'll find some enjoyment. So, yeah, it's
Nice.
it's bad, but it's good.
I gotcha.
All right, Dave, let's go to your next one here.
All right, cool. So the next one I'm going to pick is an Acclaim publish. It was ported by Probe, and this was a game that started actually on the SEGA Titan arcade board. It's called Batman Forever. Another
Mm.
game here based on a popular 90s movie franchise. Yeah, so this game is bonkers. I do not think that this is a good game. Okay. But again, I'm going to do my best here. So it was essentially an arcade perfect port because like I said, it was started on the STV. So not much was really needed to get it over to the Saturn. And it does exist on the PlayStation as well. So again, this is not a console exclusive. Folks can definitely try it out on more than one console. But again, what makes me say that this is not a good game is that I just feel like it's just a little too crazy and a little too unfocused. I'm coming from, I love Batman games. I loved Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo. Used to
Mm,
play it with my brother all the time. You'd get such a good feeling from every punch and kick, and the
mm,
the the sound design was excellent. There was always just the right amount of characters on the screen. You could feel overwhelmed at times, but it wasn't to the point of just being ridiculous. The system would never slow down too much. It wouldn't throw so much on there that it would compromise performance or anything like that. So I'm biased, and I guess I'm kind of judging it based on coming from that, because like I've said to people, I was a huge Super NES fan. I played the hell out of Batman Returns, beat it multiple times.
oh, wow.
And just had so much fun with that game with my little brother growing up. And then, of course, Batman Forever on the Saturn is more of just like a crazy, bonkers,
It
chaotic
was more
fighter.
extreme, wasn't it?
Extreme doesn't even begin to describe. Like, okay, there's the enemies, like they take such cheap shots at you sometimes, like one hit kills. You make the wrong move, guy hits you one time and you're dead. There are like collectibles. There are little things that you can pick up that are like power-ups, but with this game they're just like littered all over the place. It's like not even, they don't even like do anything to kind of like dole it out to you in a way that makes sense. And again, we had other brawlers, like Turtles in Time or the Simpsons arcade game, stuff like that.
Mm,
Growing up playing games like that, I kind of got a feel for what a arcade style brawler should be. Like a scrolling beat 'em up. Streets of Rage too, excellent,
mm,
phenomenal game. Probably that's probably like the best game in terms of like design for a scrolling beat 'em up like that. You know, Streets of Rage 2 is absolutely phenomenal. And so that's everything that this game is not. This game, it's just, it's very colorful. It does use like true transparency for these like super OP power up effects or whatever. You were just like screen clear,
Hmm.
but the graphics are kind of gritty and dark,
Yeah.
which I guess, you know, Batman, they could get away. Maybe they get a pass for that, but it's just like gritty and dark and maybe a kind of ugly here and there. There's a lot of like weird scaling stuff going on.
Oh yeah.
Tell me what you think about this game.
So yeah, I agree. It's dark, it's gritty, it's fast to the point of being too fast. And I have a hilarious memory of playing this game two-player with a friend. And you could actually, so you both can pick the same character. So you could have
Right.
two Batmans or two Robins or whatever.
Exactly.
Anyways, so we were both Batman, and like things got so crazy that for a good 10 minutes I was playing and I was thinking that I was the other Batman.
Right.
Because you can't, like, you
Yes.
know what I mean? And I was so confused.
Yes.
And, you know, to add to like the, you're right, the dark sort of setting to it. And like being a 2D game, you wouldn't expect an overly large amount of pixelation, but there was.
Mhm.
And like, it's almost as if the sprites were created and then they were blown up some, you know, like it was just, I don't know. To me, it was way too chaotic, and I obviously couldn't follow it
Mhm.
properly. And there, to me, it was a pointless game. I
Yes.
had a hard time grabbing sort of any enjoyment out of it. So it's funny that this is on your list of games that,
Right.
you
So
know.
why is this on my list? Okay, because like I said, um, some people like this game, and I mean I've encountered plenty. I've encountered plenty of people who are like, oh well, you know, I don't know about you, but I like this game, you know. Uh,
Mm,
and I'm like, okay, so it's a game that I've come back to multiple times because here's the thing: I liked Batman Forever. It wasn't a great movie to be honest, but I, you know, again, it was the '90s. I was a kid. You had movies like Godzilla '98. You
mhm.
know, you had Batman Forever. You had Independence Day. You watch them now and they're like really corny, you know, like disaster
Yep.
movies or really corny like superhero movie. But at the same time, they have that kind of '90s charm to them. You know, you keep low expectations, but essentially, you know, it's like I want to like this game. I do. And every time somebody says that they love this game, I'm always just like, what's wrong with me? Am I just not seeing something here? You know, so I guess you could say it's a game that I've persisted with and I've come back to, despite every
Mhm.
time I fire it up, I'm just like, what the hell is going on? Like, I feel like there's a lack of restraint here. You know, like there's a lack of like proper planning
Yep.
and, you know, doling out enemies in a logical fashion, you know, that it creates some kind of meaningful rhythm because a beat 'em up or a brawler needs to have some kind of rhythm to drive the game and keep you going, you know? And so this
Yep.
game has anything but rhythm. It's just absolute bonkers chaos almost every second. So it's one of those games I would almost say like if you're high or drunk off your ass and you just want to experience something crazy with a friend, then sure, fire this up. You know, you might enjoy yourself. But like Peter, you might end up controlling the wrong character. You might end up thinking that you're controlling one character when in fact yours is the other character because there are so many sprites on screen and so much stuff going on that it's hard to keep track of your character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It almost feels like they had sort of half developed this game and then they were like, "Oh, time's up. We got to ship it. Let's
Right.
just like triple the amount of enemies and then
Right.
slap it out the door," you know?
Yeah.
That's what it kind of feels like to me, that it feels half baked and the solution to get it to retail ready was to just like add enemies, add sprites, you
Well, the
know, and
truth is, it's pretty much the same deal on the STV. It's a quarter muncher. You know, it's just
oh
one of
yeah.
those games that's you're supposed to pop quarters in when you're waiting for your movie or at the theater or something like that, right? It brings you in because it's Batman or it's Batman Forever, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's just going to eat your quarters and kill you with like these cheap one hit kills, you know? So
Yeah.
it's not a great game. It's not a good game. I don't know if I would say that it's a good game, but people like this game and it's on my list because it's one of those games that I continue to try
Mhm.
despite I should probably stop now. Honestly, you know, I'm coming up on 40 years old here, and I think I've tried it enough. And but I tried it with my son maybe a week or two ago, and he was just like, "This game's crazy," but like he was laughing, he was enjoying himself. So I guess if you're like 9, maybe it speaks to you.
See, maybe instead of Batman Forever, they should have called it Batman for 40 years, and then,
Right.
that would have been more accurate.
It's kind of an
Maybe.
expensive game too. Long box. I know we don't. It
Yes.
doesn't really matter. Folks can play games in a multitude of ways. But I mean, if you're looking to collect, it's definitely one of the pricier games for how not good it is. you
Yeah,
know?
no, that's true.
Yeah,
And I'd be actually interested to find out why that is, like whether it just had a lower pressing or
it's
whether it was a
possible.
later acclaim game or whatever. I don't know the answer, but you're right. Yeah, it tends to be for a
Yeah,
genuine copy, it tends to be pricier, and
yeah.
it certainly isn't quality over quantity or anything like that.
No,
So
no. I
no,
think that it's just one of those games. Maybe folks played the arcade version back in the day, and they're just kind of willing to
yeah,
overlook its many, many flaws. But yeah, essentially it's just poor game design, really. But
yeah,
what does it have going for it? It's got good music. It's got like this arcade pumping soundtrack. It's got it's a Batman franchise. It's very colorful. It's got some good effects. It's just fumbles, many, many, many fumbles in terms of the game design. So
yeah.
and that's where I'll leave it. I because we're I don't want this to end up being a 2-hour podcast. What is your next game?
All right, so the last game on my list is a game that I just love playing, and I know that most people hate this game. It is Congo, the Lost City of Zinj. So this was another sort of early release for the Saturn. It was one of the system's first sort of first-person shooters. Not the first, because I think Robotica takes that cake. But
And
it was
Genwar came before this.
yes, yeah. So one of the systems first, and it was based on what was going to be like while they were developing it. The movie hadn't quite released yet, and the movie Congo ended up tanking at the box office. It did really badly, and it's too bad because they were saying, "Oh, by the writer of Jurassic Park," and it just had so much hype behind it, and it was going to be
Mhm.
like it was going to be the next big thing. And then the movie came, and it was a stinker. So,
Right.
this isn't like Independence Day where the movie was a low budget movie and it ended up doing super well and people loved it. This was
Right.
a high budget movie that just tanked. And so before this game even released on Saturn, the Saturn exclusive game, it was already saddled with this like, preconception of, okay, this isn't going to be that good. And then it came
Mhm.
out and a lot of folks thought it absolutely sucked. And I love it. I love this game. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So it is a first person shooter and it's set over sort of multiple days and it follows an alternate storyline that kind of goes along with what happened in the movie. And you start out in the jungle and you kind of have to find your way and fight off all these weird, spiders and flies and all these other sort of made up enemies that weren't in the movie. And eventually you get gorillas that you have to fight as well. And you can find weapons and weapon upgrades, and you can look around, you can jump, you can strafe, you can do all this stuff. The paths are, relatively enclosed. Like you can't just go walking through the jungle. There are paths that you have to follow, but there are also some secrets that you can kind of sort of go through some of the jungle and find. And the game is tough. It is a really, really difficult game. I think part of that is owing to the control scheme. Like you
Mhm.
can't turn
Mhm.
around super quickly, and so you might be getting hit from behind or whatever, and it takes you a little while to sort of spin around, and by then your enemy may have moved out of range or whatever. So it
Mhm.
could be there's some cheap hits there and what have you. And admittedly, being early 3D, some of the graphics are definitely pixelated in the jungle levels. But I think the problem with this game is once you get past the jungle levels, you end up going through the city of Zinj and through some other sort of cave-like levels. You end up visiting a volcano where everything looks remarkably different, visually, and it's actually really solid for a first effort on the Saturn. It's really good. But I just, looking back at the reviews from the time and the commentary from the critics, I honestly don't think anybody made it quite that far. and I don't blame them. The control takes some getting used to. It's definitely old school. It lacks a lot of the quality of life improvements that would come later, and it does look quite a bit pixelated, and it's tough. It's a tough game. So a lot of it, you're going to die a lot, and a lot of it's going to be memorizing, where the enemies came out of and whatever, and being able to shoot them ahead of time and so on and so forth. So it's a game that you have to invest some time in, but you end up having a good time with the game. There's a couple levels when you get out of the jungle that have zero enemies in them. There's nobody to shoot. There are some environmental sort of hazards and traps to navigate through,
Hmm.
but they're more sort of like maze-like puzzles where you flip a switch here and a door somewhere else opens and whatever, and
Hmm.
the frame rate's okay and it moves pretty well, and again, I am well aware that people, even folks that have genuinely given this game a shot again after all these years, have come away thinking, yeah, no, this is a steaming pile of garbage. And yet I love it. To me, it's a difficult game. You have to really kind of get into it. And to sort of, how do I put this, accentuate my playthrough experience, I ended up watching the original Congo movie, and
Hmm.
I understand it was super cheesy and whatever, but it kind of added some more color to the game, for me.
Hmm.
So for me, it was definitely a worthwhile experience. It is a difficult experience, super super tough, and the game is structured so that it'll only let you continue so many times. So you could be on level 12 or whatever, and if you use up your last life, you can't save your save file. It'll just kick you right back to the beginning. So it
Hmm.
is tough as a game. It is tough in terms of being able to continue if you die. It will definitely take some time, but to me, it's worth it. It's worth the journey. And I mean, this is a Saturn exclusive. You're not going to play this anywhere else, for better or
Hmm.
for worse. And yet, if you persist with it, and especially once you get out of the jungle levels, which are only about the first third of the game, you're in for a pretty cool ride. Like there's some fascinating bosses. Some of the visuals end up looking really really cool. There's this temple that you're in, and you come upon this giant coliseum, and it's open air all of a sudden, and you see this amazingly red volcano in the background, and like it's a fun game once you sort of get past the difficult controls and just the difficulty in general. It's something that I really want more people to give a try. And I think this is a game that you've kind of enjoyed a little bit too, isn't it?
It is actually. I'm glad you picked this because it's one I would have wanted to talk about for sure. Um, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, okay? Okay, so this is one of those games that I avoided. When I was collecting for the Saturn, I avoided it because it's just one of those kind of like folks tell you to avoid it, or the angry video game nerd tells you it's a steaming pile, and
Mhm.
that you should avoid it, right? So I just stepped over it every time I would be searching for games to collect. And then, of course, this dude, Peter, tells me that the game is good. And I'm like, okay, well, I have a lot of respect for Peter. Should I rethink my opinion of him? No, but so I'm thinking to myself, okay, so like, Peter's never really steered me wrong in terms of like we like a lot of the same stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give this a shot, and I'm gonna like fork out the dough to buy a boxed copy of the game, which wasn't cheap
Mhm.
when you consider how bad people say that it is. And so I didn't burn it or anything. I just bought a copy of the game, fired it up, and I spent about a solid week with it.
Mm.
Didn't beat the game, definitely came up against a wall, a point of no return where I was just like, okay, the game is kicking my ass now. I got to get, pardon my French, but I got to get better.
Mhm.
I got to get good. Um, but I enjoyed every minute of it. I did. It has excellent sound design. Let's talk about what it does right. I think the graphics are actually quite charming. It's better than Gen War, also by Jumping Jack
Mhm.
and Leland, which Nick Pandemonium did a great interview with him. I can't wait for him to do Congo because I'm really interested to see
Yep.
what kind of hurdles, what kind of struggles they had. But essentially, it does a really good job creating atmosphere. And again, that's
Mm.
very important to me in games. When it comes to games, just like when you're standing there in a place, and I ask myself, does it do a good job of helping me feel like I'm there? Putting you in that place. The game has phenomenal sound design. it creates jungle foliage with 2D sprites, but they're constantly moving, and it's constantly having to shift these 2D sprites around to kind of give you an awareness of your position. And I would say that that's probably the most difficult part, is that you'll have enemies coming at you from all sides, and sometimes spatial awareness is kind of a difficulty, because you might be able to hit every enemy that's in front of you, but somehow you missed one that was behind you. Now,
Yeah.
luckily, the game does have an about face. It has like a button that'll just allow you to whip around and shoot at whatever's behind you. But you do take a couple hits, first. Sometimes there are parts of the game where you get poisoned, and
Yeah.
your vision starts to go, and you're starting to move sluggishly and everything like that. And then you have to find like a first aid kit, or like an antidote or whatever,
Yes.
so that it wears off. I think that's actually very clever. Can be kind of frustrating. Yes, it presents an extra challenge, but I don't think the controls are really that difficult. You have really good solid strafing, forward and lateral move. Turning around is not incredibly fast, but again, you have that button that'll just whip your character around. So if you use that liberally, you'll do much better in the game. Some of the jumps are there are areas where you have to jump over a
Yep.
ravine or something like that. And of course, the timing, you'll probably fail a couple times until you understand that you have to take it at a run and jump. But once you get it, you get it. But just all of the sprites are actually, I think, really good. I like the sprite designs. I like the 3D modeled things. I like all the hidden paths. Very good
Yes.
use of this. I don't know. You've got a GPS with a map,
Yep.
and it kind of draws itself as you discover new areas. And there are always little hidden areas that you can find between bushes and stuff like that. I quite like the jungle in it. I like the other stages you're talking about as well, but I like the jungle. It has a really good atmosphere, and when you play this game with your sound system cranked up, and you just got that the waterfalls, and you've got the little whistling birds and stuff like that, it just sounds like you're in the jungle. Then you've got this funny character, Butembo Caballo,
Caballo,
who
yes.
so he's trying to make his way through the jungle and survive, because I guess the helicopter crashed or whatever. And the plot plays out in these video logs, that he does, and it's so, I want to say, a little over the top, and kind of hammed up, but I love that stuff.
Mhm.
So the video,
Mhm.
I love the FMV
Yes.
portions of the game. Uh yeah, I guess I would just say that, yeah, you're going to get to a portion of the game where there's some verticality to it, and you have to go up a hill and stuff, and the game gets really difficult there. And there are other weapons that you have to get, like
Yeah.
is it a rocket launcher or a bazooka or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I guess are dropped. You're supposed to assume that those are like air dropped in, to the jungle, and you're supposed to pick them up. Um, it really is a much better game than people give it credit for.
Agreed.
It doesn't have a lot of quality of life things that we take for granted now in modern games. So yeah, it's certainly lacking a few things, and maybe there are other games that are better. Maybe like Alien Trilogy is another game that's kind of like that first person shooter. It's a third party game that's like a first person shooter that does a very good job, and I feel plays really well. Maybe compared to that, it might not live up to that, but I really think more people need to play this game.
So on the back of the box, it's advertised that the game is compatible with the mission stick, which is a
Ah,
flight stick. Have you played this game with the mission stick?
no,
So I
no, I
have,
haven't. Okay.
because I've got one. I was like, of course I have to try this. And it's weird because you have to use all of your buttons quite frequently, and your arms just get tired because you're constantly pressing forward. Like, you know what I mean? Like in a
Mhm,
flight
mhm.
game, you're using the actual stick less, in my opinion, and you're
Right.
maybe a little bit more sporadic with the buttons. Whereas with Congo, when you're using it with the flight stick, first of all, you sort of feel like it's almost like playing Descent, where
Mhm.
you don't feel like a human anymore. You feel like some
Right.
sort of flying bot
Floaty?
or whatever, right? And then you get
Yes.
your arms just get tired easily because the mission stick's a big old stick, and like it works, but it's sort of like somebody had said at some point, have you ever tried controlling knights with the arcade racer? It's kind of like that. Like it works, but it's just weird. It just kind of changes things. So,
Right.
so to me, it's much better to actually play with the standard regular D-pad. But yeah, I have to give these FMV clips another shout out here, because the movie again at the time was billed as going to be the best special effects, and it was going to be the latest, coolest thing ever. And so the production value of the FMV clips in this game is actually really high, right?
It's really good. Yeah, it is really
It's,
good.
it's quite
You know,
good. And so,
I mean,
like,
if you're used to stuff like Sewer Shark, or it's nothing like that. I mean, it's actually
no,
much better.
yes, yes. And
Yeah.
so, yes, it is sort of campy and it is a bit over the top. Of course it is,
Right.
but it's actually
Right.
high quality, right? So, yeah. So to me, it's
Well,
this.
like when he's like, "I've got fever. I'm
Yeah.
going to die." Like he's just a little,
Yes.
he's a
Yes.
little melodramatic, but yeah, it's very, very fun. I'm really glad that you sold me on this game. Maybe we're the crazy ones, but I enjoy this game and I continue to play it. Actually, I do. I have a lot of fun with it. I haven't beaten it like you have,
Hmm.
and I know we're talking about like persisting with a game, like kind of like I want to mention that when we were younger and maybe we had fewer games, like I had the original Ninja Turtles game on the NES,
Hmm.
and that game would just kick your butt,
Yeah.
left, right, and center. Like it was so difficult. And yet if it was the only thing you had, you kept playing and you just got good. Or like Battletoads, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Like it was a really murderously difficult game, and yet you kept playing it because what else are you going to play? Um, that's not the case here. So I have a lot of other stuff to play, and I do find myself turning off the machine at a certain point. I wouldn't say I throw my controller or anything like that. It's not that kind of frustrating. It's just like well, I'm just not good enough.
Hmm.
It is kind of difficult at a point, but I think that that's like a wall that I need to get over
Hmm.
personally. But everything that I've experienced up to that point, I've had a blast with, and it was definitely worth the price of admission. I'm glad I own a copy of the game for sure.
Yep.
It's not one that I'll be getting rid of.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're on to your last selection now.
Yeah, yeah. So Pat's gonna love this choice, but I had to pick Mr. Bones, um, because of course, not everybody likes this game. I understand why. It's a really interesting game. So now this is a platform exclusive. This is a Sega Saturn exclusive. If you want to play this game, you got to play it on Sega Saturn. We've had a few that you know qualify, like Congo, of course, Sega
Hmm.
Saturn exclusive. Um, Mr. Bones is a crazy game. I would characterize it almost like a party game. I don't know.
Okay.
Like, so what I've noticed is that every level is different. It constantly, with each level, shakes up the gameplay. Like some levels later on are kind of similar to ones previous, but it like for every level, it changes the genre a little bit, but
Right.
they're all pattern. They're all based on a pattern. You basically start out, you're running through a graveyard and you're being chased by these skeletons with red eyes. You're a skeleton with blue eyes. So I guess that means that you haven't like been converted to evil or whatever, so they're like zombie skeletons or whatever. They're chasing after you to try to trap you and turn you into one of them, right?
Mm.
And of course you don't want to, because you want to keep your soul and play music or whatever. I don't know. So essentially you're running away from these skeletons and they're throwing bones at you, right?
Hmm.
And if they hit you, they can actually knock out some of your bones, right? You'll end up being like a hopping stump, and
Yep.
of course that'll impede your movement. And so the first level is kind of brutal in its difficulty. It can be really hard to get past, but when you figure out the pattern, it's almost like boss battles, when you notice the pattern and you realize that, okay, I just have to like repeat this and do this, hang in here for like 5 minutes, and then I reach the end point. You can get through it, and then of course you're tossed into another level where you're on like a big long table, and these skeletons are like doing the wave, like they
Yeah.
would do it like
Yeah.
at a baseball game or at a soccer game, the crowd does the wave, and so they do the wave, and then you have to like jump over it, right? Again, it's a pattern. Essentially the game is just a bunch of mini games that are
Mm.
based on kind of like a pattern, and that have like a musical theme in it, because the game is very music heavy. It's got Ronnie Montrose, who did the soundtrack with the guitar and everything. And there's even a level in there where you sit down with him and you play the guitar, you know, and then you have to like you learn how to play the guitar and then follow the pattern to be able to play the guitar. There are like these little blue butterfly things that I guess you grab those, you get your parts back or whatever, you know. But yeah, like every new level is just kind of a new little mini game that is based on a pattern that kind of is fun and engaging for a few minutes, and then you're on to the next level, you know, and you have to figure out that pattern, you know. And the game can be pretty difficult, you know.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes it's like really easy, and then sometimes it's like really difficult, like where you're running down the hill and the logs are coming after you, you know. So and then there's like a level with a big T-Rex, like a skeletal
Yes.
T-Rex. It's just crazy, off the wall kind of, but what's there I feel like is really well designed, and there's a lot of like clever charm and ambiance to it. I really like the game. I really think it's something kind of special that could only really have come out on the Sega Saturn. What do you think?
Okay, so I don't have too much experience with this game, but that's probably because each time I've tried it, I've just been turned off. It
Okay.
like you're right. It feels like a collection of mini games and not always woven like together very well, because you're right, the
Mhm.
difficulty can spike huge
Mhm.
and then
Yes.
crash. And also there are definitely sections that are less intuitive, like running away from skeletons to the graveyard. Okay, I get that, that's simple. But like there's this
Right.
guitar playing level where it's like, okay, what am I doing exactly? You know, so,
Exactly.
right, like so
Right.
yeah, so your difficulty spikes and then crashes and then spikes again, and the goals of each level aren't immediately clear. So to me, it feels like a sort of um almost like a
Tech demo
slapstick type of,
or
you know, almost like a comedy and sometimes a comedy of
yes.
errors in a way,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
but it isn't irredeemable. There are some pretty cool sections of it. I'm just not sure how well
Right.
it gels together as a package, you know? So,
Yeah.
and so how did you
Yeah.
get past that? Like, how did you work through it to the point where you enjoyed the game?
Well, I think that's the thing is that I think that there are parts of the game that I don't enjoy that are kind of frustrating. And then there are plenty of parts about it that I do enjoy, you know, and it's kind of like Batman Forever, if you will, but better. I mean, honestly, like Batman Forever just barely made my list. I was having a hard time deciding what I would choose for that fifth game. But you know, with Mr. Bones, like I say, it's a platform exclusive,
Yep.
Sega Saturn exclusive. And I feel like when it comes to those games, you've got to at least try it, you know, because it's
Yep.
just Saturn had some of those games that were just like tied to the platform and couldn't be experienced anywhere else, like Burning Rangers, for example. Much better game, by the way. But essentially, you know, I just think that it is quirky. It's got great music. I like the sprite design and a lot of the color and stuff like that. It's 2 discs, so you know there was so much awesomeness that it couldn't fit on a single disc. But no, seriously, it's not a great game, but it is an interesting, quirky game, and it's one that definitely this community has come to kind of like ironically love. I think you know we all like teasing Pat about,
Yeah.
you know, Mr. Bones, and because you know the thing I respect about Pat is like he's just honest. He's just this is not my cup of tea. You know, like I have tried,
Yep.
not for lack of trying. He's been punished by having to play this game multiple times. You know, and I think that he's given it every ounce of you know effort to try to find
Yes.
something in there, and it just didn't didn't float his boat. You know, but it's funny now he'll probably go down in history being linked to this game somehow. You know? But I mean we recently had a shout on Shiro from Fitz Houston, who did like the voice, you know, did the song, the voice of Mr. Bones. um and that was really awesome. You know, I think there's just a bunch of little things, you know, a bunch of little things that end up drawing me back to this game, especially at Halloween. You know, you fire it up,
Yes.
play it for like an hour. I don't take it too seriously, for sure. It's not, you know, Panzer Saga or anything like that. If you just don't take it that seriously and you just try to have some fun with what's there, there is like a level select code that you can access, and that'll take you wherever you want. You know, so you can just play the levels that you enjoy instead of punishing yourself by having to endure every single level. But definitely, it's a game that is incredibly quirky and locked to the Sega Saturn. So it ends up being kind of a metaphor for the system a bit, at least to some extent.
And I don't know if you see the Japanese cover, it's like
Oh
super
yeah.
weird and psychedelic.
Looks like a Journey album cover.
Yeah, like it's
you
just
know,
not at all what you'd expect, hey? But
definitely not. But yeah, I prefer the US box art, if I'm being
sure.
honest. But it's funny, even the US box art, it says down at the bottom left, it's got the Sega Saturn exclusive seal,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then they had to go to the lengths of slapping a sticker additionally on it to be like, check out Mr. Bones on the only system that you can check it out on, Sega Saturn. And it's like they pop that sticker on the front as like nobody's buying this game. We really have to hit them over the head with the fact that they're not going to be able to get it anywhere else,
Which is funny.
Yeah, maybe they thought it would be like a system seller or something like that, but yeah, no. It's definitely not a system
Nope.
seller. But,
Nope, not at
should
all.
folks check it out? Yes. Check it out, form your own opinion, take what you will from what we say, but again, it's definitely one that I come back to probably every Halloween or every other Halloween, and I do enjoy it in doses.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So I want to ask you something. Is there a game that is considered by many to be a bad game that you've tried to like, but you found it completely irredeemable and impossible?
Oh man, okay. So there's a very small number of these games on the Saturn, yes. And the one that I absolutely just cannot forgive in any way, shape, or form is The Crow, City of Angels. I mean, okay, where to begin? So the movies themselves are very sort of, they're cult classic. They're, Brandon Lee, whatever. They're good for what they are. You got to really kind of get into it, but they tell a gritty story and all the rest of it. And you could just see that, yeah, okay, you can make a video game out of this
Mm-hmm.
this storyline. There's a mythos there, so that's good. But so the game is a beat 'em up with static 2D backgrounds and 3D characters overlaid over top of it. So it's kind of like Resident Evil in that, the 3D characters move in and out of the screen, they get larger and whatever. The control scheme is a tank control scheme, and the Crow whom you play has, your basic punches and kicks as moves. There's a couple of issues though. So the backgrounds are nothing to write home about. They're sort of low resolution. I wouldn't say very nice looking graphics at all.
Mm-hmm.
The 3D models of the Crow as well as the enemies are just bad. They're grainy. They're sort of, there's no color there. They're all they look like mud.
Mm-hmm.
The game is set at night, of course, so everything's kind of dark and gritty. And the control scheme is just horrendous. Like, I could forgive bad graphics. I mean, look at Corpse Killer. I could forgive, relatively banal gameplay like Independence Day.
Mm-hmm.
But when the game doesn't play well, it's tough to recover from. Like, you have to really, get everything else right. And this game gets pretty much nothing right. One of the irritants is you like a single scene, a single sort of area where you have to fight bad guys can take place viewed from multiple vantage points. So you could move to a certain zone within a play field that you're in, and then the angles change,
Mm-hmm.
and that is supremely disorienting. And so you've got to sort of readjust. Okay, well, in relation to me, where is my enemy and whatever. The game does not respond to your button presses very quickly at all. Like, there is a noticeable delay.
Right.
And so in order to progress through the game, you almost have to get used to doing actions a little bit ahead of time, and it just feels unnatural and stilted. And the game is difficult. So it looks like crap. It doesn't sound well at all. The sort of gameplay is bad, and look, I tried to like this game because I figured if I can like Congo, if I can like Independence Day, I can darn well like The Crow. But I can't quite get over that hump where I'm going to say, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, I can't even see the vision that the programmers were going for.
Mhm.
Like, yes, clearly it's a beat 'em up, but it's a bad beat 'em up. Like, have these guys never played a beat 'em up? Like, you know what I mean? And again, it comes back to, okay, so in terms of quality control, who in their right mind saw this game and thought, yeah, there we go, that's our ticket. So again, this to me is, we're going to rely on the Crow license.
Yeah.
We're going to rely on the fact that there's no internet to tell people that this game is, a steaming pile of nothing good, and we're just going to hope that it sells, on the strength of its license, of the Crow property. And it doesn't work, folks. And I mean, like, one final sort of insult to injury, like, there are games that are done really well with 3D characters overlaid over top of 2D backgrounds. So I'm talking about the Resident Evils of the world, the Final Fantasy VII. So you can do this correctly. But for example, a lot of the areas, the 2D backgrounds, like, the game takes place at night. So there are, for example, street lights or neon lights or whatever, and they
Mhm.
reflect beautifully
Right.
on the 2D background. And then your stiff, robotic, bland character walks through, and none of that reflection is cast on them.
Mhm.
None of that light falls on them. And so it is completely immersion breaking. During those moments, you immediately know that this is just a 2D picture with a 3D, character model moving across it, and no thought given into making sure that it sort of gels well at all. So to me, the game is extremely sloppy, and it is an excuse for a game that was made simply to cash in on the Crow license. And it's just bad. I don't know. Have you played it? Is this something, like, have you gotten anything out of this game? Because I'm sorry, to me, this is not a game.
I have I have not even attempted. I've been warned so vehemently by so many people to
Yeah.
stay away from this game, that even mere exposure to the game could, like, taint me in some way. Uh, that I would just have, like, a urine smell on me if I know. I mean, honestly, I've watched Sam, the SSG, suffer through this game, like, in a stream,
Oh yeah.
and it was like one of those punishment streams where all his viewers, like, voted for him to, like, have to play this game.
Yeah.
And I felt so bad for him. I was just like, I'm so sorry. Like, this is
Mhm,
terrible.
mhm.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So this is actually one of those games where I've literally taken everybody's advice, and I don't even think I've ever even fired it up on an ODE or an emulator. I've seen enough to stay away. Yeah.
Well, this is, one of the friends of the show, A Murder of Crows, Kay. He loves the Crow franchise. And
Hmm.
so you would think that somebody like him would be perhaps the
Right.
most forgiving.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a Saturn game. He loves Saturn. It's a Crow game. He loves the
He
Crow.
wants to
But
like.
he will be the first to tell you that this is not a game that
Yeah.
is worthy of the name, video game. It just it
Mhm.
it really isn't. Um, Quick little funny story from me. During the heyday when I was still collecting Saturn games, and I mean, I only say still collecting Saturn games because I've gotten to a full set, so I'm not collecting per se. But
Mhm.
when I was still collecting games, somehow, I don't know if I was tracking them wrong or whatever, but I ended up with 2 copies of The Crow. I was like, what is happening? What have I done to myself? What is going on? So I did manage to get rid of 1 copy of The Crow. And I'm really just hoping that the copy I kept doesn't have babies, so I end up with, 2 copies again. But yeah, it's just utterly not worth anybody's time at all. So that's definitely one game that, despite my love for Saturn and for games from that era, and for being exceptionally forgiving and being able to be, taken along to sort of follow the developer's vision, this is a game that just couldn't do it for me. So
Right.
I want to know whether there's any such game for you that you tried to love, you wanted to love, you needed to love, but you just couldn't get there.
There is. Before I want to just say how interesting it is that we have, so we essentially have one game based on a huge Hollywood movie that we want to like, and we found something to like in it, in Independence Day. Then there's game based on a huge Hollywood movie that was an absolute stinker that we somehow found a
Yeah.
lot to love. And then, of course, a movie based on a huge Hollywood movie that is absolutely terrible and completely irredeemable in every way.
Yes.
So that's just funny, you know. But yeah, you know, like I can understand Kay really wanting to like that game and trying to find
Oh
something
yeah.
in it and just failing, failing to find anything. Yeah, for me, you know, I have a hard time thinking of a game that's worse than The Crow, at least from what I understand. But there is a game that I have spent time with, that I have played, that I think maybe gives The Crow a run for its money, or at least comes close. And that is Alone in the Dark 2 on the Saturn.
Oh.
Here's a game,
Oh.
folks, that I'm not kidding you. It's almost unplayable. And by that, I just mean it. I struggle to play this game to the point where I would rather gouge my eyes out than have to endure this complete BS. Like, this game is so bad that I actually think it would be a form of torture to be forced to sit in a room and play this game, you
Yeah.
guys. Alone in the Dark 2 is a game that I want to like, okay? Because Alone in the Dark was a huge series when I was a kid. Okay, it was came before Resident Evil. It kind of helped establish the genre, at least, of survival horror, if you will. Definitely Resident Evil, you know,
Hmm.
gets that title for sure, you know, of refining it and everything. And of course, Resident Evil is based on the earlier game on what it was, the NES.
Uh, yes, I think so.
I
The
can't think of the name.
castle one, right?
Yes, the castle one. Yeah, but so I mean, we could argue back and forth which one is like which one started it all. But definitely, Alone in the Dark is right there in the beginning. And the original Alone in the Dark game, I really liked. Like I played the MS DOS version when I was a kid. Subsequently, I played through the 3DO version and really enjoyed it. Mind you, it's not perfect. It moves at a slow pace. You do it has the tank controls, which are kind of frustrating, but it's playable and the game is beatable on the 3DO and enjoyable. You know, you take it at a leisurely pace and you try to enjoy the atmosphere and those really, really terrible flat shaded 3D graphics. It's a fun little like look back at, wow, like this is the beginnings of survival horror, you know, especially
Mm.
3D survival horror. So of course I want to play Alone in the Dark too. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I own a Saturn and I own a copy of this game. It was cheap, you know, the long box was cheap. I think it was like a $5 game when I bought it or something off eBay.
Mm.
And I thought, you know, I'm gonna really enjoy this one. No, I mean, what can I say? The graphics are terrible. The music is terrible. The interface, like the time it takes to load up the menu so that you can swap out items, is terrible. The frame rate is terrible. The interaction with enemies and just cheap deaths is terrible. there there
Yeah.
is it's not even that engaging of a story because it's got like this gangster premise. You know, it's not like the kind of just Edward Carnby going to the mansion and all by himself. Like now there's like this weird kind of 20s mobster thing. It's just not as engaging or interesting of a story to me. And there's just nothing. I couldn't find a single thing to like about this game. Now I found out that it runs better on 3DO and it runs much better on MS DOS. Like the PC version of this game is the game to play. If you're gonna play any version of it, I think you have to go the MS DOS route. But that being said, I think I'm fine just sticking with having played the original Alone in the Dark, and I'll just leave it at that. You know,
So the game does have a very attractive cover. I'll say that.
yes, like so somebody painted this beautiful cover, and it reminds me of like the Atari days where you'd have like this beautiful painted artwork on the cover that makes you think the game is going to be
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
And then you boot it up and you're just like, what is this garbage? And it's like hot garbage.
Yeah, like, I have not played this game too much, but the visuals are like the characters look. I don't know if they were going for like a cartoony almost look, but they come across like the people come out looking like bad, like just bad.
Mm,
And the control scheme is exceptionally difficult to get used to in my opinion. And the
yes.
loading
Yeah.
times when you want to save or move through
Oh,
menu, like wow.
the movement, like not even just the loading time. So yes, the loading times are terrible, but even when you're moving your character around, it's just a snail's pace.
Yes.
It's a snail's pace. And then when you want to like fire a gun, you have to go into a menu to change it over to like being able to fire a gun.
Yes.
So you know how like most survival horror games have a button for that, so you can so you can pick up your gun and point it and shoot it. Now you have to go into a menu that takes forever to load, and then you have to say, okay, I want to actually use my gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and then of course, if you want to interact with an item, you have to go back into your menu to do that. It's just so clunky and terrible. I have the 3DO version, and I have fired it up, and it is better marginally, not as better as I thought it would be, because I only just recently got that gifted to me from somebody. It is better on the 3DO, but not by that much. I really recommend folks stay far away from this game, because it's like torture. It's not even, it literally is like, I can't think of hardly anything worse than being forced to play this game, other than maybe being forced to play The Crow.
Yeah. So bad design and bad execution too, right? Like the
Yeah.
game is not optimized, and yeah, no, this is definitely not a game that I've spent any amount of time with. And like the thing with Saturn games, Dave, is, Saturn is sort of the main system I play. I play very little outside of Saturn. And so any and all pieces of software that I can play, I will approach with more than an open mind. I will be more than accommodating towards any shortcomings or, any sort of reminders that, these were early days in 3D, that the graphics aren't always going to be the best, and so on and so forth. But yeah, not just The Crow, but also Alone in the Dark too. It just it cannot for me be a game that I can find any redeeming qualities in, and there aren't too many of those pieces of software. So, good choice, good choice with Alone in the Dark.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that with so many great games on the Saturn, some folks are just not going to even bother with any of these. And honestly, you're not missing out that much, But again, like I think Peter and I have pretty much scraped the bottom of the barrel in terms of like trying every game on the console. And we've found things to like about these games for the most part, and there are little things to like here and there. None of these games are, Knights or Shining Force 3 or anything like that. They're not phenomenal games, but they are games that have some things going for them. And they've just, they have some shortcomings for sure that kind of, turn most people away. But not us. We persist with these games, for one reason or another. So
yeah. So, for those of you that stuck around with us all the way to the end, give some of these games a try, and I think you might be surprised. If you're in the right sort of frame of mind when you're going into them, then you might find some enjoyment in there, and that if that's the case, then mission accomplished. Then we've shone a light on games that most people have shunned, and so that's our goal.
Right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this cast, and until next time, this has been Dave and Peter from SHIRO Editor's Corner, reminding you to play your SEGA Saturn, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.
I wanna